Hey guys, we are going to talk about chapter 12 today, which is the blood. Um, we'll be covering chapter 12 and chapter 14 together this week. They are kind of related, the blood and the lymph, just with the processes that go along with each. So we'll talk about the blood and then I'll post a separate lecture concerning the lymph. So we'll start by talking about blood composition. So the blood tissue is going to be slightly alkaline, which means that it has a pH of about 7.35 to 7.45. Blood is a fluid tissue, so if you've ever, which I'm sure you have, cut your hand and you see the blood that kind of oozes out, that's the fluid tissue or the blood tissue. There's multiple or tons of red blood cells and different other types of blood cells inside that blood tissue, but that oozing that we see is going to be from the blood tissue itself. So the amount of blood will vary depending upon size of a person and then the sex. Males are generally larger than females, so they're going to have more blood in their bodies, averaging about 4 to 6 liters for a person, which makes up 7 to 9% of a body weight. A component of blood tissue is going to be blood plasma. So this is blood minus the cells. So this is mostly water containing many dissolved substances such as nutrients, salts, and hormones. So 7% of that plasma is going to be plasma proteins, which are albumin, globulins, fibrinogen, and prothrombin. So albumin plays a role in water retention. Globulins are antibodies, and then the fibrinogen and prothrombin are clotting factors. Another thing that you'll read about is blood serum, which is going to be the plasma without the clotting factors. So blood serum does not contain fibrinogen or prothrombin. Some of the formed elements that you'll find in that blood tissue are the red blood cells or erythrocytes, the white blood cells or the leukocytes, and then platelets or thrombocytes. White blood cells are further broken up into granular leukocytes and agranular leukocytes. So granular means that there's no granules in the cytoplasm. If you're looking at it under a microscope, you would see little dots in these leukocytes, and those are neutrophils, eosinophils, and basophils. And then the agranular, so no granules in the cytoplasm, are the lymphocytes and monocytes. So per millimeter cubed of blood, we'll have 4.2 to 6.2 million red blood cells, 5,000 to 10,000 white blood cells, and 300,000 platelets. Here's just a diagram showing those different formed elements in the blood. So you can see if we're looking at like the basophils or the eosinophils, how there's those little dots inside of them where the lymphocytes and the monocytes do not have those dots. So that would be the granular versus agranular. Hematopoiesis is a term that refers to the formation of new blood cells. So those formed elements or the blood cells that we find in our body have a fairly short life compared to the life of our cells as a whole. So if we weren't constantly forming those new blood cells, eventually we would run out of red blood cells and white blood cells. So erythrocytes are going to circulate in the body for up to 4 months. Granular leukocytes only circulate for a few days, and then agranular leukocytes can circulate for more than 6 months. Two kinds of connective tissue are going to play a role in hematopoiesis, and that's the myeloid tissue or the red bone marrow and the lymphoid tissue. Red bone marrow is going to form all of the blood cells except for some lymphocytes and monocytes, which are formed in the lymphatic tissue. So lymphatic tissue is going to include the lymph nodes, thymus, and spleen. This diagram just gives you a breakdown of the components of the blood. So you can see here the formed elements make up 45%, plasma is the remaining 55%, and then the further breakdown of those elements. So the structure and function of those red blood cells, they're a disc shape. There is no nuclei in these cells. I think of them as little donuts, but they don't have a hole in the middle. Their function is to transport oxygen and carbon dioxide. So because there's no nucleus in these red blood cells, they are unable to reproduce themselves or replace those lost or damaged cellular components. So that's why we are constantly undergoing that hematopoiesis process, is to replace the damaged and lost red blood cells. A component of red blood cells is going to be hemoglobin. These are molecules that fill up the red blood cells, and they play a critical role in the transportation and exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide between blood and the cells found in the body. Anemia is going to be a condition where the blood is not able to carry oxygen. So caused by a couple of different reasons, could be an inadequate number of red blood cells, a deficiency of that hemoglobin, or pernicious anemia, which is a deficiency of vitamin B12. Another one that's pretty common with anemia is an iron deficiency. So when we're talking about blood typing, we're going to use what's called the ABO system. So if you know your blood type, you know or you've heard of that people are type A, type B, type AB, or type O. So that's the ABO typing system. And then there's also a classification of RH. So that would be the RH system. So the two components that play a role in blood types are going to be antigens and antibodies. So an antigen is some sort of substance that activates the immune system that the body sees as a threat. So this could be an invading organism, bacteria, something that's going to activate the immune system. So our blood cells actually have antigens on them. Okay. And then the antibodies are going to be the body's immune response that's stimulated by an antigen. So an antigen is going to activate the immune system, and the antibody is going to be the response to that stimulation. So if we're looking at different types of blood, type A is going to have an A antigen. And then inside the plasma, there's going to be anti-B antibodies. So what that means is that those type A antigens are recognized by the body as being a normal process or a normal component of the blood. If a B cell with those B antigens were to enter into the bloodstream, then those anti-B antibodies would form a defensive attack against those, and the body would reject that blood. So that's why we have to make sure that blood typing is accurate when we are giving blood donations or giving blood to an injured patient. So type A has A antigens and anti-B antibodies. Type B is going to have B antigens and anti-A antibodies. Type AB, excuse me, has both A and B antigens, but there's no antibodies in the plasma. So that one is the universal recipient. It can receive any type of blood because there's no antibodies that will like form a defense against those other blood types. And then type O does not have any antigens, but it contains both A and B antibodies. So type O is the universal donor because there's no antigens on the blood cells. They won't cause a response from any of those anti-A or anti-B antibodies. This diagram just shows kind of what happens to the blood cells if the wrong blood type is entered into the body. So if we have a person who is type A, they can receive type O and there's no agglutination, or type A, but if there's type B or type AB blood donated to a type A person, those blood cells are going to clump together. So with the Rh system, this is a positive or a negative antigen. So you either have the antigen, which is a Rh positive, or you don't have the antigen, which is Rh negative. So Rh positive, again, that Rh factor antigen is present. Rh negative, there is no Rh factor present. So when we're talking about blood types in association with the Rh system, somebody will be A positive or A negative, B positive, B negative. So the positive and negative refers to that Rh system, and then the A, B, and O is that ABO system, depending upon which antigen and antibodies are present in a person. So the universal donor is going to be type O negative, and then the universal recipient is AB positive. One condition that can occur is hemolytic anemia, which is erythroblastosis fetalis. And this happens when there's an Rh positive fetus. So during an initial pregnancy, if a mother is Rh negative and she has an Rh positive fetus, this will cause the formation of antibodies that will react with Rh positive blood. So that first initial interaction between a mother and the firstborn child causes those antibodies to produce. If the Rh negative mom then carries a second child that's Rh positive, those antibodies will then form an immune reaction against the fetus, and that's where that anemia will take place. So the firstborn child is okay. It's when that second fetus, if they're Rh positive, that's when the issue occurs. White blood cells, so the general function of these is going to be defense. They're also known as leukocytes. So leuko means white and then cyte is cell. So that's how those two words are associated. Depending upon the issue that a person, or the disease or virus that a person has, a differential white blood cell count can be performed to analyze the different proportions of each type of white blood cell. So leukopenia would be a low white blood cell count, while leukocytosis is a high white blood cell count. The different types of white blood cells. So again, granular, there are granules in the cytoplasm of these. So the three types are the neutrophils, eosinophils, and the basophils. So the neutrophils are going to carry out phagocytosis. Eosinophils act against parasitic irritants and allergies, and the basophils are going to produce heparin, which inhibit that clotting or agglutination. Agranular leukocytes are monocytes, and then lymphocytes. So the monocytes also carry out phagocytosis, and then the lymphocytes are going to produce antibodies, which are the B lymphocytes, or else they will directly attack those foreign cells, which are the T lymphocytes. So some disorders of white blood cells, which we kind of touched base on earlier, the leukopenia is the low white blood cell count, leukocytosis is high, and then leukemia refers to cancer of the white blood cell. So those are typical of cells that do not function properly, and you'll see an elevated white blood cell count with those. Platelets are the last component of the blood, and these are going to play an essential role in blood clotting. So the clotting factors are going to release at the injury site and produce prothrombin activator. Prothrombin activator and the calcium are going to convert prothrombin to thrombin, and then the thrombin reacts with the fibrinogen and triggers the formation of fibrin, which is going to trap the red blood cells and form the clot. So here is kind of that whole process in action. So here you can see that the clotting factors are released. Those platelets are going to form on the side wherever that injury is on the side of the vessel. Chemical reactions are going to take place. So prothrombin activator and calcium are going to create thrombin. And then that is going to react with the fibrinogen to form fibrin, which is this little net or mesh that's going to trap the red blood cells and cause the hole in that vessel to close up. A thrombus is going to be when a clot stays in place. So the issue with that is if we have that fibrin that's collecting all of these red blood cells and that clot does not dissolve or kind of absorb back into the body, it's going to continue to collect red blood cells, and eventually it could get so large that it closes off the passageway of that vessel. So this is called a thrombosis. An embolus is going to be when a part of a clot dislodges and circulates through the bloodstream. So again, the problem with that is eventually it's going to run the risk of getting to a vessel where it's too large to enter or pass through, and then it's going to block that vessel and no blood flow will pass through the vessel anymore. So that is an embolus. So these are abnormal blood clotting conditions, and there's a number of drugs that are available now to help with these issues. That's essentially blood. If you guys have any questions or want to visit about any of these components, just email me and let me know.